So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the 2M podcast, which is a conversation between two seasoned journalists with a combined experience of 40 years. My name is Julie Masiga, and with me is...
Clay Muganda.
This week, we're discussing revolution. To quote the great and great Tracy Chapman, we're talking about a revolution. And we are trying to understand within our context as Kenyans, are we capable of revolution? Do we have anything to revolt against? What is the situation in our country that would prompt people to uprise or to challenge the status quo and try to dislodge the current leadership because they feel that it's not working for them? So revolution is described as a forcible overthrow of a government or social order in favor of a new system. As it stands in Kenya today, do we have problems that are big enough that could possibly push us to this kind of popular movement? Or is revolution happening every day as we speak in different spaces, including the social media? As we discuss this topic today, we'll be talking to Njeri Thorne, who is a political communications analyst or consultant. And we also had the chance to talk to Cherotich Sei, who describes herself as an active citizen. And she's also going to give us some insights into what is possible, what's not, and the state of affairs in our country today. My name is Julie Masiga.
And my name is Clay Muganda.
Clay, so please set the stage for us. What are we doing? How are we attacking this beast called revolution?
I don't know what you actually want to do because there are different ways of attacking it. The revolution is not the beast. The beast is the
problems that we have as a nation.
The problems that is the beast. That is what I think probably we need to be challenging, or we need to. But now, how do we challenge it? Do we challenge it through a popular uprising, the way you've described what a revolution is, or do we do it quietly through in a scholarly way or in an academic way? The way you've mentioned also that there are revolutions happening, minor changes here and there after people have made noise. Or do we go back, do we do it the way it has been happening in other African countries like Chad, Tunisia, Egypt, Sudan, Zimbabwe, which probably you might not call a revolution per se because the person actually had to probably die or was too old to hold office. And that's when there was this change. So that's what we need to know, to understand, like, how do we want to do it? Do we want to do it the way it happened earlier on in the 90s and 92 for us to get multi-party and for us to get the 2010 constitution? So yes, it is happening, but at the same time, it's not happening.
It's almost like the long what's that saying? The Martin Luther King saying that people like to quote, something about the arc of history. Do you remember it? Barack Obama used to say it a lot. Anyway, when I remember that quote, I'll bring it up again, just to say that it's a long process. If you think about Kenya itself, of course, there was the founding fathers, quote unquote, because some people dispute that they were founding fathers, or or people like the Mau Mau or Mekatilili, people who fought for independence, the first movers in Kenya who fought to dislodge the
colonial rule. Yeah.
Exactly. And then you come to the second liberation, circa 1990, 1991, when people felt that despite having independence, we do not have enough freedoms. And they call themselves the second liberators. Then we come here, where now we want to think about the third liberation, right? In my mind, I would like it to be like what happened in Sudan, where it was a popular movement, where people, individuals, active citizens came together and realized that Sudan as a country was not working for the people, and they organized themselves, and it was people-driven. Of course, they got to a stage where they did manage to oust Omar al-Bashir, but then now the military stepped in because I suppose it felt that the country had become too unstable.
Okay, fine. What you just mentioned about how it happened in Sudan is that the people felt that actually they needed change. The people felt.
The people felt.
But here, I mean, like, it was, when you say the people, more or less, like, there was discontent more or less across the whole country.
Yes.
But now is that what you're lacking here? Could that be what you're lacking here, in as much as we just have pockets of resistance or pockets? Because when other people feel like, yes, we're ready for change, there's always that opposing group that says, no, everything is going on well.
Right.
And I think that's probably what is happening, what is probably impeding our movement or our move towards that so-called revolution, whether it is a violent uprising or whether it is done in a scholarly way.
Like a quiet revolution. Yeah.
Which actually sometimes I feel, at least the times when people do tend to make noise, even if they make noise with their fingers,
right,
at least there's some change, you know?
Change can be seen from what they're saying.
From what that, from
the noise that they're making, they prompt people in leadership to change things.
Yeah. And going back to why probably it was easier during the 91, 92 is because there was at least one particular cause that people were fighting for. People wanted, like, we want multi-party. So there was this thing that people could rally around and say, this is what we want. But right now, what is happening is that because of this as the noises that we make, we're making so much noise about so many things. So we don't have one rallying call. Is it the economy? Or is it just overall, as the economy permeated into every sector, that actually even the education sector is affected, that even the health sector is affected, that the unemployment and all that. So it's very difficult to actually say, like, we want change for this, unlike in the 90s. And then also you could rally people around, like, what is the problem with Kenya? The problem with Kenya is that we have only one party.
So, right, it was very clear what you were fighting against.
Yes, and then there were leaders also to these parties, there were leaders also to
the movement.
To the movement.
Yeah.
Right now, because of these small problems, I believe that every cause has a leader.
Right.
Yeah, so we don't have, like, that one leader who can actually say it, or we don't have that group of leaders like, okay, fine, this is our main problem and these are our leaders, unlike that time.
Which was a characteristic of the popular movement in Sudan. They had leaders and they were organized. But why I brought up the whole in Kenya's history from independence is that ever since then until now, we are still feeling that we haven't felt the full fruits of being independent. So all these years, we've been feeling what I like to call microaggressions. It started off with we wanted to get freedom from the colonialists. Then it became this, we have freedom, but we're too oppressed. And then now we come to a point where we feel that the state treats us with so much madarao. They just do things above our heads. They make decisions. They borrow billions. The whole building bridges initiative, where now they want to change our constitution. It's not people centric. It's leadership centric. So what I say all this to say, it might come to, and then people are responding to these different aggressions at different levels and in different spaces. But when you're talking about a movement, like happened in Tunisia, when the street vendor set himself on fire because he was so frustrated.
Yeah.
Because of those many years of oppression, food was so expensive, fuel was so expensive. It was just impossible to live in Tunisia. So he set himself on fire, and then that triggered the Tunisian revolution.
So basically, Tunisia, this was more or less like the economy.
It was the economy, but it was also years and years of authoritarian rule. So like a bad economy married authoritarianism, and it became a situation where people could not deal with living in that country anymore.
Yeah, now that brings me, like, the person who set himself on fire was a grocer.
He was a street vendor,
which we can actually probably call here Mama Mboga.
Mama Mboga, yes.
So have we reached that level where actually there's a Mama Mboga there who actually going to stand up as it was in the 1990s and all that, where the need or the education or the civic education for that everything is wrong was known from the top to the down, to the bottom? Like the Mama Mbogas, you'd actually approach them and they knew that actually we need multi-party. By that I mean in as much as the people who are leading this, they could go to any place in the country and draw crowds. They could actually, if they went to maybe your village in Busia or Kitale, people would actually come to listen to them because they had something to say. And that's what I feel like now is lacking. That we don't have those people who can actually go and talk to the people as they say, on the ground.
Yes, but this Tunisian Babamboga, he was reacting out of frustration. That is what pushed him to set himself on fire. It was not out of, I didn't know him personally, but I don't think it was out of a general civic understanding of how the country is being governed. Just at his level, he was feeling the pinch of bad governance, and so that's what triggered it. So I'm just
are we going into that level, because that also needs a little understanding of the civic, as you call it, your civic the problems in governance.
Right.
It needs you to understand that actually I cannot afford this, but here we just say I cannot afford this, but then you struggle to find a way of affording it.
Yeah, you the first thing that comes to your mind is how can I afford it, not how can I change the way my country is governed.
Exactly. So you fight so hard, you struggle, you work harder than you're supposed to work. So instead of trying to change the government, you're actually only trying to change your status.
Exactly.
Yeah, by working harder than you normally would. You see, and then there is no driving force for somebody to tell you, like, you know what, you're not supposed to work hard like that. If at all we could change the governance,
you wouldn't have to.
You won't have to. Everything will come to you. And I think that is what was happening in the 90s.
Yeah, so when I was talking to Njeri Thorne earlier, like I said, she is a political communications consultant. She actually defined what a revolution is and the circumstances within which a revolution can happen. And she says some of the things that you say, that you need a strong leader and you need an organized movement. So let's just listen in and see what Njeri Thorne had to say. Okay, so what I'm hearing you saying is that things, it's a mixed bag. Some things are going well, some things are not going well. So having said that, do you think that we are prime for a revolution? And if we are or not, what indeed is a revolution?
Okay, a revolution. It's basically the overthrow of the central authority. That's what a revolution is. But there has to be a number of ingredients that come together at the same time, such as there has to be at least two opposing sides. So there has to be different groups or sides that are in disagreement. Ordinarily, people have to have access to weapons. I want to give a very broad interpretation to weapons, in that it can be words, can be used as weapons.
Yeah.
So platforms to spread messages and so on. You also need an accomplished leader, a person who will lead the revolution, which I think is probably one of the reasons we find it quite difficult. There's no really viable alternatives. If you look at what I would call the opposition today, who is Ruto, he himself has been accused of...
Did you say the opposition is Ruto? I'm even stuttering. Okay.
I think in terms of practicality, yes, not in theory, but...
Not official opposition, but...
Yeah, but that's who seems to be criticizing the government, working against the government. Of course, we had the handshake in March. Was it March 2019 or March 2020? I forget now. And the handshake brought us together, and you found the opposition was less vocal and less overt.
Okay, fine. Well, after listening to what Njeri says, and you say that I more or less share the same views with her, I want to deny that vehemently. And probably that's another way why we can't have a revolution.
Oh my goodness, you cannot agree.
Yeah, because we cannot agree. So we mentioned things like, here's a case where instead of us feeling like the person who's feeling oppressed, instead of feeling that we need to change the person, we need to change the oppressor, the most that we do is that we work harder, or we only change our status by working harder than before. So this is where probably I think we work harder to change our economic status. And I think this is where probably the economy comes in, because I've always maintained, and I always think that our economy as it is, the reason why we cannot have this revolution as it is, either as in the form of through violent protests or through a scholarly way, is because of our economy. The economy cannot sustain this. Who is that person who's going to leave his place of work or a place of work or a place of trying to earn a living to go to the streets? That's one. And two, our intellectuals, our scholars, the people that we want to change, the people that we feel like are oppressing us, or the people that we feel are causing this oppression, are the same people that actually sometimes they hire them. So you don't have somebody actually there to champion this cause and say like, okay, fine, people, I have all these documents, or this is the study I've done, and these are the areas that actually we can change, either even if it's through sabotage or through meaningful change, through ideas. It's because the people we feel like are the ones who are oppressing us are the same people the scholars and the intellectuals work for, or they hire them. So that's where I feel the economy comes in.
That's an interesting point you make, because in 2017, after the first election was annulled, was it in August? Second Tuesday of August, I believe.
Yeah.
And the opposition at that time instituted what they were calling an economic boycott.
Yeah.
I think that's what they called it. So they actually also understood that there's different ways to create change. You can go to the streets, you can Twitter, you can tweet, or you can make your voice known on social media platforms, or you can actually look at it from a point of economics and hit, quote unquote, the oppressors where it hurts, which is in their wallets, which I think that boycott kind of worked. I mean, you could see that people responded, because it didn't mean that they had to go out on the streets. It just meant that they had to refrain from buying certain items, and that's the way they were registering their disquiet. Yeah. So it also speaks to me when you talk about the economy not being
able to sustain
a revolution. Also links into the point where we are not, that thing people say, we are not tired enough, you are not angry enough. You know, if you were angry enough, regardless of who your employer was, or regardless of how much money you had in your pocket, be it too much or too little, depending on which side of the scale you were on, you would still want to push for change.
Yeah, but you see, like that particular case of the economic boycott, let's say some of the items they boycotted probably involved wheat or maybe maize, you know?
Yes.
But you see, like, if you figured, like, okay, fine, Miss Masiga is the oppressor. Miss Masiga sells maize flour. So what am I going to do? I am going to stop buying that particular brand of maize flour.
Right.
It's going to affect more or less the whole supply chain, because there's that farmer whose now maize will not be bought. There's that supplier, there's that shopkeeper.
It could be that those people are also part of this movement for change, so they're willing to take those hits.
That's where I talk about how the economy comes in, is that, and we should be ready for that. So for us actually to accept that we want a revolution, or for this revolution to take place, these are some of the sacrifices.
Yes.
There are people who will suffer, and the people who will suffer are not even the people who are going to get arrested, but it's going to
be across board.
It's across board, like in that particular case of the economic boycott.
Right.
So if at all it were milk, the dairy farmers actually, whose milk by that time they probably ended up, if they were used to supply to the dairy, to the processor, maybe 10 liters, probably it reduced, because now the dairy processor could not take more because there's no place to sell them. There was a dent. There must have been a dent in the market. And then also another thing currently in the current situation is the gig economy. The gig economy, in as much as it's more or less like you get a contract, a 3-month contract, sometimes it's a 6-month contract, it goes to the longest, maybe it's a year's contract. So this gig economy, and that's why even during this time of COVID, it has really affected very many people, because there are these things that you do for a short period of time. And the gig economy is like that thing, oh, you guys, next week I have this, come and I need this thing, I need an influencer, or I need a content creator, you know? But those are some of the things that you do not know on whose foot, on whose whatever toes you'll be stepping when you decide to take to the streets to probably block that entrance of that building. And you don't know, probably that building belongs to that person who actually gave you that contract for 1 week, you know?
Okay.
Yeah, I always have, maybe I've not explained it clearly, but I always have that feeling that the gig economy also, it gets affected, it's very sensitive, and it gets affected very, very easily by small, minor changes. And that's why probably still, because we need all these so-called young people to support the change and stuff.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is that in as much as you need change, you need to live, you need to survive. So how do you do them both at the same time? You've also said there's an element of sacrifice, which
Exactly.
definitely there's an element of sacrifice. And then it's also a long game. Like we talked to Cheritich last week, Cheritich Sei, who is an active citizen, and she said that revolution is happening all the time in different spaces, and it's not a short-term solution. It's something that happens over years, and change happens incrementally. And she also spoke about the economy versus revolution and how those two things can coexist. Let's listen into what she had to say.
I think the thing for me with revolution and being, we were talking about this earlier, being part of the Generation X, our notion and understanding, or my notion and understanding of revolution might be quite different. Or we grew up watching Malcolm X and hearing about what he did and the power to the people, Black Panthers, and you have this sense of fist in the air, and we are taking this, we're taking the despots by a storm, and we're going to basically unseat them and bring in a new order. But what I've come to understand over time is revolution is not an event, it's a process. So to answer your question, Clay, yes, when a group of us were just fed up with Kenya Power, and we're not the only ones who are tired of Kenya Power, there are millions of consumers over the years. You know, that's a little piece of the jigsaw puzzle. You have people angry saying, no, we want energy justice. We're fed up. We're utterly and completely fed up with what Kenya Power and the entire energy sector is doing to electricity consumers.
Actually, this is just a part
Yes, and then you have Linda Katiba. There was Humanity Kenya, where we crowdfunded to implement cash transfers to families that were most immediately and badly affected during the early days of the lockdown and curfew last year when COVID-19 pandemic struck. So there's so many little cogs. They stop these thieves. There is Unlock Our Country. There is Stop Loaning Kenya. So all of these form part and parcel of this bigger picture, which then I would loosely refer to as revolution.
That was Cheritich Sei, who's an active citizen and also one of the key minds behind the Switch Off KPLC movement that has actually gained a lot of traction on Twitter and in various online spaces. And that was, as she says herself, Switch Off KPLC was purely an online initiative in as much as they took action. They took actual physical action by going to court and challenging KPLC and gathering all this data on tariffs and the services provided by the company. It actually started on Twitter. And she had another campaign which was called Humanity KE, I believe, or Humanity for Kenyans, which came about because she was responding to the economic needs of Kenyans during the COVID-19 pandemic and actually mobilizing on Twitter and then raising money via M-Pesa, which is another virtual platform, to give these families the money that they needed, which brings me to a place where I feel that revolution can also happen digitally. You can raise your voice on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, on various LinkedIn, various other social media platforms, and you will be heard. And sometimes what you say, if there are enough of you, will actually trigger change within leadership circles. But then sometimes we feel that if you've tweeted something, if you've retweeted perhaps what Clay Muganda has said today, or what Julie Masiga has said tomorrow, or Boniface Mwangi has said, you feel that you're part of a movement just for the fact that you have tweeted. But the fact of the matter is, and I believe Jerry Thorne also spoke about this, is that sometimes you're just venting, you're just speaking into the wind, and your words go into the Twitterverse, and that's where it ends. Nothing really happens, and people tend to feel that by speaking up in an online space, you have actually shifted the dial, when in actual fact, a lot of things are still happening how they always happened.
No, I think speaking or thinking with the fingers, as sometimes I call it, I think to some extent it works, because there've been some situations where people have actually made so much noise online, and then there was some change. So it's we can actually give the people who make noise online, give them credit and say, like, okay, probably the state or the powers that be decided to act upon because of what you guys said and all that, because of your voices or because of your words or your utterances or whatever it is that you did online. But at the same time, we might also think like, okay, fine. What happens here is probably that is what the state had planned to do,
In the first place, before you even spoke.
Before you even spoke. So maybe they're going to do that. So, but let's give them credit. Let's give ourselves credit, those of us who probably make noise online, and say like, okay, fine, this thing is happening. But even as these things happen, still we keep on shouting, or every day we keep on saying like, we want a revolution. What this country needs is a revolution. And when the Tunisia or the Arab Spring happened another time, I mean, some years back, the online community was very charged. The Kenyan online community was very charged and said, don't joke around with us. We actually you've seen what those guys have done. We can actually do that.
Yeah, they actually called the Arab Spring the Twitter revolution.
The Twitter revolution. Actually, it started there, and then the Egypt one. I think the Egypt one was the one that was organized by this guy who was either working for Google and he actually spoke about it, how they organized all this thing. But now here is after Kenyans were really charged, nothing came out of it. They never, because those guys organized it
online, and then
but then they went offline, actually physically, and stood there in that square and all that. Here, first of all, we don't have that square in the first place.
We have Freedom Corner.
Okay, we have Freedom Corner. Okay, fine, that's okay.
It's part of a square.
But you see, again, that's where people, after that, nothing much happened. So the online community, whatever they appeared charged, I think nobody also, the powers that be, or these people figured like, no, these guys, they just talk. But I can give them credit. They actually managed to remove the president from Twitter.
Oh, yes. They hounded him off Twitter. Our president, now Uhuru Kenyatta.
Yes, we kicked him off Twitter completely.
He was tired of our memes.
And like other places where it is Twitter that is kicking, like in the case of Trump, where it is Twitter physically that actually did kick a president out of Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. Here, it is the people who did it, you know.
It was a popular movement.
That was a popular movement. So ideally, what we probably lack is that courage to probably turn this online rage
into action.
Yes, Cherotich says that there've been some changes, there've been some progress, some gains have been made because of all this. Because like they have another one also called Linda Katiba. Cherotich is also under Linda Katiba. Yeah. So she says that these changes have been made, but at the same time, have these changes, are they big enough? If we really feel that they've been made, then why do we still keep on saying we need a revolution every time, even when cops block the road?
Yes, and I've just thought about the question you asked in the beginning, which was, what is wrong with Kenya? And the apple has fallen on my head, like Buddha. The apple fell on Buddha's head. Anyway, it's the gap between the rich and the poor. It's the inequality in terms of distribution of resources. It's the fact that some people get to live large and have gotten to live large since pre-1963, and majority of us are not benefiting from our country's, the potential of our country. And it's come to light in recent years since the Building Bridges initiative took hold, and with the deputy president riding on that rich-poor divide. He didn't create it, he found it there. And that is actually the problem with Kenyan society, is the fact that there's gross inequality between the haves and the have-nots. And every day you go along struggling with your life, being too consumed with trying to survive, to the extent that you can't even demand better leadership. That is where the problem lies, because you don't have enough. And then people throw around words like shared prosperity in this whole BBI movement, but do they actually mean it? Are they actually going to put things into place that make sure that everybody has at least basic services from the government? So if we're ever going to revolt, and if we're ever going to have that Babamboga Tunisian moment where somebody sets himself alight, it'll be because of that inequality. It'll be because maybe you're sick, you can't get quality medical care, your kids don't get quality education, you can't get to work because you can't get to work and be productive because you're spending 4 hours on the road. It'll be those kind of things that eventually make people realize that they need to demand for what is rightfully theirs, and not just let the elite, very small percentage of Kenyans, continue to live off the sweat of our brows.
Okay, fine. You spoke about like the things about like almost everything public has failed, healthcare, education and stuff like that. But you see, this is the biggest problem we have is that why this revolution cannot happen is that Kenyans tend to find private solutions to public problems.
Because the public things are not working. The services are not working. What do you want them to
Exactly.
do?
So what is this change that we want then? Okay, we keep on saying like, oh, when politicians are unwell, they should actually go to public hospitals.
They should.
And we say that when we are driving to a private hospital.
Because we all know that they should be leading by example by going to the very hospitals that they're not
what is
supporting.
this change that we want? How do you want to bring in this change? Because I was reading something he's a professor of history, and he's specialized in, I think, the Spanish Revolution, if ever there was one. I mean, the French Revolution. The French Revolution. And he says, like, people need to distinguish between major revolutions that transform social and political structures, coups by armed elites, and common forms of protest over particular issues. So all this, so what is it that we want and what is it that we can achieve? We complain about all these public problems, but we tend to find private solutions for them. And immediately you find that, you forget about that public hospital. As long as you can afford, you've worked your body parts off and you can afford that private hospital or private Medicare, you forget about pushing for change for public hospitals. And the same thing with schools also. So I think this is where probably we fail, because we cannot agree on what it is that we want.
No, I'm agreed. I've agreed on what I want, and I'm sure other people want the same thing.
And that's why. Okay, but that's why I was saying, like, in the 90s and maybe after the multi-party thing, and then later, why we achieved these two things that we achieved, the multi-party and the new constitution, the 2010 constitution, is that we actually knew what it is that we want the constitution changed. So people came together and figured, like, because there was no other way. You can't find a private solution to a bad constitution.
Okay, right now what our problem is actually it's governance. For example, Clay, if I could take my child to a school where she could walk and not have to bus her across town, I would do that in a heartbeat. It would be a public school and I'd be very happy. If I had a public hospital near me that I could get. In fact, I've actually been to, there's a city council hospital in Langata, in Gay 1 on Gay 2, which is very good. It works perfectly. Some of these things actually do work. And I actually go there because it works and it's affordable. If everybody could have those kinds of scenarios, if I didn't have to drive 20 odd kilometers one way to work in the morning, I would jump at the chance. If I could jump on a tram or something that would take me 10, 15 minutes and was not congested and was very quick, I would do that.
Try building a road for that tram and see.
This is what I'm saying. If I was to go out on the streets, or as I raise my voice, like in my column in the Standard, that is what I want. I just want basic services for every Kenyan, so that we're not always faced with big fish going to use finding private solutions for public problems because they can't be bothered to solve the public space.
Yeah, but you see, some of these things have been run down because we allowed them to happen. And I think
How did you allow them to happen?
Exactly. I was expecting that kind of reaction.
Okay. And I hope no one tells me I'm too emotional because I'll get very upset.
No. I was expecting that kind of reaction because Kenyans, we've become accustomed to this thing where we don't want to take responsibility. We don't want to admit that actually things could be this bad because probably we made a mistake here.
Which mistake did we
and
make?
Probably you talked about governance. Yeah. That government or the people who govern us, they didn't come there like drop from the sky. They were not brought to us by aliens.
They were brought to us by IBC and the servers.
And IBC is our institution. So actually the failure in institutions to give us good leaders, the failure in these institutions is that we tend to think like my duty as a Kenyan ends with voting.
When I vote, yeah.
Yes. So we don't push further and say like, okay, fine. So my MCA in this hospital, which is not in Langata, the MCA in Langata, the hospital works, or
it's a clinic.
The clinic works. But what about the one in Mudhurwa? Why can't I look for the leader and actually push him to do that? That's where I feel like sometimes we tend to give up and say like, there's nothing much they will do. You get? There's nothing. So we tend to give up. But then also at the same time, these weak leaders,
Don't tell me that I have the leaders I deserve, because that's going to
Who
be...
voted for them?
That's my question as well.
Yeah, I
because
think that's what we also have to admit, that some of these things are run down. Just when COVID started, I had this relative who said, like, somebody asked, like, where are you getting your
jab
masks?
Okay.
And he said something like, I get them from somebody who works in Bangathi, you know? And by that time, and he added, like, I know they're good quality because he steals them from Bangathi. And you see, here was a private citizen buying things and then at the same time, we are the same people who will start complaining, you know, that actually things are not working. But we play into all this. I think we also need to accept that, okay, fine, we want this change. It should happen. Either way we want it, either as an uprising or as a violent protest, but we need to accept that actually we also need to change.
Absolutely. Now that you say that, I think corruption, for example, starts from the ground up. Everybody is involved at one level or another. And I think what we need to do as a society, like you rightly say, in as much as I have very strong feelings about what the government should do, is that we all need to reflect. And it's a society-wide problem where we have created a system that is now not servicing us. And that's because we're willing to cut corners. Like your friend who was stealing masks from Bagathi, you're willing to bribe a cop, for example? Not
my friend. Somebody was stealing and selling.
Okay, sorry. Somebody you didn't know.
I didn't know the other person, but somebody was stealing and selling, and people were buying.
Yes, those people who are buying are just as culpable as a person who stole to sell, because they should not be doing that. So it comes back. A lot of the conversations that we have about Kenya are solvable right from the micro level, from the family to the community to the nation, because we need to change the way that we've been doing business.
We also need to revolve for this revolution.
I think that's where the revolution starts, yeah?
It starts from the family.
From the family, and then it goes up. It now permeates community, county, nationally, where we're all in this agreement that we need to do better.
So this talk about revolution, are we really in a situation where, like, this big revolution that Kenyans talk about all the time, is it really going to happen?
Not today and not tomorrow. I don't know, but I don't think we're ready, and I don't think we're organized enough. And I also don't think, like you rightly said, we're honest enough with ourselves to see that we're part of the problem.
So I think that's a good place to end. No revolution soon.
My name is Julie Masiga.
And my name is Clay Muganda.
Until next time.